This is the Fresh Foam More Trail version 3. And it's one of the tallest, squishiest, and widest trail shoes I've ever run in. And while I totally recognize that this shoe is literally called the More, is this going to be too much? Yo, what's going on everybody? My name is Kofuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews shoes here on YouTube. And today I'm gonna talk about the New Balance Fresh Foam More Trail version 3. But before I give my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that New Balance sent to me for the purpose of review, so I did not have to pay for these shoes. However, they're not paying me to make this video or to use the shoe, and they're not going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the New Balance Fresh Foam More Trail version 3. And let's go over some of the specs. We've got a really tall stack height shoe here, super chunky, full of that Fresh Foam X material that we've seen in the road version of the shoe last year, which ended up being my favorite max cushion shoe of 2022. And now we've got it in pretty much the exact same configuration for the More Trail version 3 in 2023. Now we've got a 4mm drop, so it's a pretty low heel drop shoe, but there is a significant amount of shaping and curving of the forefoot of the shoe, so it rocks and rolls pretty smoothly through the foot strike, so that way it doesn't feel clunky at all. 3% of the foam in here is from a bio-based material. Now I know that's not a lot, but the 3% I think is the minimum threshold for New Balance's green leaf standard, and it's defined as needing 3% or more of bio-based materials in that midsole. Also, to be able to satisfy that standard, you need to have a certain amount of recycled content for the upper and recycled content for the outsole. And we have both of those things in this shoe too. For the outsole, we have a super chunky Vibram outsole, which is in the same kind of pattern as the road version of the shoe, but instead we've got super deep lugs and even that micro lug traction pattern, which I've seen used to great success in a lot of other shoes as well. And this Vibram outsole is called the Evo Step Eco, and it's 30% recycled content to make these gigantic lugs. Now moving to the upper, we have 50% recycled content here, and I think a big part of that is going to come from this rubbery, somewhat dense kind of toe cap, and I believe that's made out of regrind, so I feel like there's old shoes that were ground down and made into a new material that's overlaid onto this nice toe cap pattern, which I think looks fantastic and also is pretty functional in case you're accidentally kicking or tripping over roots and rocks while you're out there on the trails. The tongue is gusseted, but it did give me a little bit of problems. It's still kind of moved around a little bit more than I'd like, but I do appreciate the fact that it is a very thin and lightly padded mesh. In fact, the whole heel cup back here is very lightly padded. There is a little bit of kind of extra padding right here on the Achilles flare, and this is kind of like one of the biggest visual differences in terms of the trail version of this shoe and the road version. This kind of squared off Achilles portion of this shoe, it looks kind of weird to me. It kind of makes it feel like an afterthought in terms of the design cues and the color blocking that's over here. There's also a giant pull tab in the back, which feels very kind of like superfluous and a little bit unnecessary. For the heel cup itself, it's not too rigid, but there is this very thick kind of like rubbery plasticky type of thing that's on the back here. I don't know, I feel like this is a very strange design choice and feels very like dissonant with the way the rest of this shoe is set up, but I think the main purpose of it is to give you a little bit of extra protection on the heel and also give a little bit of stability to an otherwise kind of pretty straightforward upper that breathes really well. Altogether, this shoe comes in at a very hefty weight, which you would expect from a shoe that kind of looks and is this big and has lugs this chunky. It comes in at 320 grams or 11.3 ounces for men. And for the women, it comes in at a much more acceptable but still heavy 260 grams and 9.2 ounces. All right, now that we've talked about those specs, let's talk about what it was like to run in it. And the first thing I'll say is that it isn't too much. It's certainly more. There's more shoe here than I'm used to in other trail shoes that I run in. They've done a really good job of kind of shaping the shoe and making sure that it rolls really well. So even though you are carrying a lot of shoe on foot, it never feels like it's like too much shoe for me. It's a very comfortable shoe. It's one of the more comfortable trail shoes that I've been in. Definitely you've got a lot of plushness, and that wonderful Fresh Foam X feeling is translating over onto the trails. It is like a little bit firmer than the Fresh Foam More road version, and that's gotta be because of the thickness of these lugs that are underfoot. They're very big, and so like there's a lot that you're standing on, and that's going to kind of like dampen kind of the soft sensation of that Fresh Foam X foam, but it's not to the point where it's completely changing what the shoe feels like. It still very much feels like a Fresh Foam More shoe. I feel like you've got a shoe that you could definitely be running in all day, whether you're going for a relatively easy run, just having some fun miles on the trail, or whether you're going for a longer trail run or even an ultra marathon race. I do feel like this is going to be a pretty comfy choice, as I feel like the fit is generous but not sloppy, and also plenty of room in the toe box while still maintaining that sense of kind of snugness that you want in a shoe, so that way if the terrain does get uneven, it doesn't feel like you're sliding around in there at all. Now, I don't think that I would pick this shoe for a very muddy day, like the kind of day where like your foot is gonna sink in like several inches into mud. Like if you're gonna be running across a lot of that kind of slippery, messy stuff, I'm not sure that I'd pick it, because I just wouldn't really want to get mud in this shoe and make this already heavy shoe that much heavier. But even for something like water crossings, getting it wet, I really wouldn't worry too much about that. I feel like this is a shoe that you can take for a variety of types of terrains and can definitely keep up with me on all the kinds of trail terrain that at least that I can handle or that I readily have available to me here in the Midwest. So for me, it's a high usability kind of shoe. The other things that I didn't like, I mentioned that the tongue kind of slipped around a little bit, but the other kind of problem that I'm going to be looking out for as I take this shoe in for longer term testing is that there was kind of an uncomfortable pain point right here at the top of the lacing system. I feel like this comes up just a little bit too high, and the way that it's reinforced here, it makes for a very stiff point. So while I was running, I didn't notice any problems with it, but when just kind of like walking around in the shoe, I did feel like this was kind of rubbing into the top of my foot. And so something that I'll keep in mind for once I get to put in some really long days into the shoe is to see if this ever either loosens up or becomes a problem. I suspect that it's probably not going to be a problem, and that this will, if anything, end up breaking in to make it that much more comfortable. And overall, I feel like the upper does a fantastic job of wrangling all this midsole foam while also not having to rely on a bunch of armor and other structural pieces to be able to keep your foot securely on top of all that foam. All right, so let's summarize and wrap up. I think that the New Balance Fresh Foam More Trail version 3 is best for when you want a versatile, everyday type of training shoe. And surprisingly, it's also pretty good from road to trail as well. I felt like it had pretty decent road manners despite the fact that the lugs are so big. Now, let's talk about some options in terms of shoes that you might want to pair the Fresh Foam More Trail with. I think the first thing to look at is the obvious choice, is that if you've got the Fresh Foam More Trail for the trails, you should have the Fresh Foam More for the roads. I feel like these are basically twin sibling shoes, and if you really like one, you're probably really going to like the other. So those are two shoes that are easy to recommend to go together. And I think the other shoe to look at to pair with this shoe is going to be something that is going to be a shoe that I want to reach for on a super muddy, messy day. And for me, that's been the Salomon Sense Ride 5 lately. I don't love this shoe when things get too kind of like dried out and compacted on the trails, but when it's wet, mushy, and slippery, I've been really enjoying the Sense Ride 5, and I feel like for the days where I wouldn't want the More Trail 3, the Sense Ride 5 is going to be the shoe that I'm reaching for. Now, let's talk about some buying options for the shoe. The shoe comes in at $160, which I feel like is a pretty good price for trail shoes. A lot of shoes have been coming in at $140 or $160 in the last year or so, and I've generally just been annoyed by most of the shoes at either of those price points. But I feel like for the amount of shoe that you're getting here, plus you're getting a lot of eco-friendly initiatives in the shoe as well, I feel like $160 is a good price for this shoe. I really like it. But let's look at some of the competition to see kind of where that stacks up. I think the shoe that comes to mind first when I think about competitors to the Fresh Foam More Trail 3 is going to be the Mafate Speed 4 from Hoka. Now, the way that I've described this shoe is that it's a shoe that you can pick for pretty much any day, for pretty much any trail, and it's probably going to be the right choice. And I feel like I can kind of say the same thing for the Fresh Foam More Trail version 3. They're both really comfortable shoes that I'd be happy to run all day long in, and are surprisingly nimble, even though they are both very big shoes. Now, I think that the Mafate Speed 4 is going to be a little bit more versatile, a little bit more usable in more situations, and I feel like even in really messy conditions is a shoe that I would like. So there's kind of like a lot more going for the Mafate Speed 4, but it's also $185, so you're paying quite a bit of a premium there. Now, another shoe that I think is going to be worth considering is a shoe that I haven't even completed the review for yet. That video is going to come out hopefully in about another week or so, but I thought I'd talk to you guys about it now and give you a little bit of a preview. It's the Salomon Glide Max Trail. I feel like this is a shoe that is kind of trying to do a lot of the same things that the Fresh Foam More Trail version 3 is doing, but it's doing it kind of in a more Salomon way. It's still doing kind of a max cushion like experience, a more comfortable all-day adventures kind of shoe. And this actually may be a bit more trail capable, so depending on the kind of terrain that you're running in, you might prefer this one over the more trail version 3, and both of these shoes happen to be $160, so I definitely think that they are competing head to head. So those are my thoughts on the New Balance Fresh Foam More Trail version 3. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday right here on YouTube. I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?